Okay, so friends, we just talked about the U.S. presidential election. That was one major thing. Me and Taha live in Toronto. We're in Ontario, and our Premier Doug Ford, the leader of the province, has just called another election. Completely unnecessary. It's a year and a half early. The election was supposed to be in June 2026. And instead, Doug's decided to be like, let's host a winter election. So before we get into the Ontario election, let's talk about what's actually happened since the American presidential election.
And I just want to add and make a slight note to what you said about us being in Toronto, Ontario.
Yeah.
So far, Canada.
Yeah.
We might be America.
Okay.
I don't know.
Who knows?
So talking about the impact.
Yeah, I really believed Octavia Butler's theory that Alaska was going to first become its own country, but see now instead we see Quebec trying to be its own country and Canada maybe becoming the 51st state instead. So rather than the U.S. splitting, like Parable of the Sower said, we are now being engulfed.
Yeah. Read Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and everything Lababa said would make sense.
Exactly, and it might also convince you to start a cult, because a lot of us have been recently feeling inspired.
So I don't want to start a cult, but I want to talk about. I've been asked.
I know, of course, exactly. That's why I say that's crazy.
Literally,
You're
one
a
of
Leo.
my birthdays, one of my friends went around to all of my other friends asking and polling if they would be part of my cult, and almost everybody said yes, except for like 2 people.
They're haters.
I was very concerned for my friends because I was like, why are you guys starting a cult?
Yeah.
Why are you even trying to be part of it? Anyway,
why would they listen to you? Okay.
What are we talking about?
No, I'm kidding. They should listen to you. You should listen to them.
Yeah, so talking about cults, let's talk about the American administration, Trump 2.0. I think that before we even talk about the Ontario election and the coming Canadian federal election in a few months, we have to talk about the impacts of the Trump administration's first few weeks in the office. I think
literally weeks. Like
first few weeks.
Weeks.
It has not been a month. It actually has not been a month.
It's February 9th. Yeah. That's crazy!
Yeah, it has not been a month. So what I do want to talk a little bit about is that we are currently witnessing the beginnings of an authoritarian state in the United States. Mm-hmm. Some would argue the tendencies have always been there. Many would rightfully argue that it has always been authoritarian for Black people, for Indigenous Native American people,
for migrants.
For migrants.
For people without status. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, right? But I think what we're seeing now is a radical shift to far-right authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that Donald Trump has done so far, which are actually impacting polling in Canadian elections that are coming up.
Oh, yeah.
And we want to like build that link so it's easier for people to like understand, and then we would love for you to talk to us about it in the comments.
The geopolitical relationship and interaction is really like what's impacting us as individuals, right? And that's what matters at the end of the day. How does this shape our lives?
Exactly. So, first of all, Donald Trump has decided to end birthright citizenship. Now, birthright citizenship basically means that if you are born in the United States, you are an American citizen, right? Mm-hmm. However, we can talk about the intricacies and the morality of this executive order. What's interesting is that it's sent America into a constitutional crisis. Yeah. Because birthright citizenship is part of the American Constitution.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a president cannot. Yeah. So a president by themselves in American law, before y'all come for our necks, in American law, it's actually not possible for the president to just override the change the Constitution, right? It has to go through the Congress. So what he has done is he's passed an executive order, and now some local courts and judges are stepping in being like, no, this is unconstitutional. Right. You can't do this. But Donald Trump and his like gaggle of whatever are just saying like, no, this is fine. This is what it is. We're gonna finish this, and and Donald Trump keeps on saying no other country in the world has birthright citizenship, which is also a lie. And the term birthright itself, like, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about
And we will come to that. The whole Netanyahu evil smirking smiles next to Trump. We will come to that in a minute. But I think that's the first thing, that America is being thrown into this constitutional crisis. As somebody, you are of Bangladeshi origin, I'm of Pakistani origin. We know firsthand that these constitutional crises, if not addressed and properly handled, can really bubble into a broader crisis.
Basically, it can spiral, right? Like, out of control. And I think what's really dangerous about Donald Trump specifically, and we knew this since his first term, but that he's unapologetic with his, well, A, his fascism, but B, like his leadership, period, right, with who he is. And it's not as if Americans or the rest of the world forgot that in the 4 years that we settled for Biden, but the Democrats in the U.S. weren't able to organize people and galvanize a desire for a better life in a way that prevented him from gaining power, right? The Democrats didn't necessarily entice people and inspire them to come out and save themselves, right?
Absolutely. I forget who said this. Recently I saw it either on TikTok or Insta on a reel where somebody was saying, how the lack of imagination in humanity right now is really concerning.
Ooh, yes, that one.
It's really concerning because we have been able to convince people to imagine a world where we have colonies on Mars, where we're living in these bubbles in Mars with our families, we have schools there, we're having a great life.
Operating in cults.
Right, on all these planets. We have been able to convince people of that. But if you go to the same people who've been convinced by the billionaire and the ruling class that, yeah, let's do space exploration, let's not save our Earth, our planet, let's go, to a different planet instead. People are able to imagine that. But if you ask people, hey, I think like all workers should have paid sick leave, or I think all workers should be paid well, or I think every human being all over the world should have access to universal health care. When you talk to people in Canada and we talk to them and we say physiotherapy and your pharmaceutical drugs should be covered under the health care, and it's not, people say, no, I just can't see that ever being happening. That's too much.
But you can imagine living on Mars. You can imagine completely starting over and existing elsewhere that is not the home that you've already been given, that you already know, that you've already worked so hard to establish, to create, to build infrastructure, to socialize, and to have a relationship with, to have an ecosystem. You built this ecosystem. We have built an ecosystem. Why?
Ecosystem.
Ecosystem.
If we don't do this, we're very depressed.
Political consciousness is not fun.
It's not fun. Sometimes I wish I didn't know how the world works.
No, exactly, because then I would just be able to peace. Whereas now I'm like, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do something about it, right?
I'd be at a party being like, I'm not a political person. Let's not.
That's crazy.
Guys, let's not talk about politics.
Okay,
guys.
I don't need to be there.
And it's like, but that's where we would be if you didn't have. Anyways, coming back to things.
Okay, things are more of a spectrum.
Talking about imagination.
Yes.
I think it's really important because we can listen to these absolutely ridiculous billionaires and their dreams of, colonizing Mars, traveling to space, and that's possible for everyday working person to believe. But when you ask the same people, how about we fight for healthcare for all? How about we fight for school lunches? How about we fight for
student loan forgiveness,
universal education? People think that you're actually out of your mind. And they think that you're unable to grasp how economics works. When economics is really not a science, it's something that is very connected to the social issues that happen.
100%. 100%. Why do you think we talk about the political economy, right?
Absolutely. And I think the political affects the economic affects the political.
Yep.
And talking about Donald Trump, so that was the first thing. We're in a constitutional crisis. Another thing that I think we were discussing that happened is that we did an episode last season in the fall of the Third Take podcast talking about Trump's cabinet picks. And now I feel like all of them have been confirmed. Except for maybe one. But it's kind of insane that we now have people like Pete Hegseth. We have people like Marco Rubio, who was lauded as a moderate, but is actually saying very horrible things about Gaza, about Cuba, China. And then we also have people like Christine Ohm and people who are...
and RFK Jr.
RFK Jr. And people who are basically going on live television wearing a cowboy hat, like Christine Ohm, I think, did that, and was in New York City being like, let's do some deportations. Like, for these people, it's a play. It's an act. It's role playing fascism, but what they don't forget is that there's real human and people on the other side. And the right wing's argument to that, to counter us, is like, oh, well, why don't you talk about the, people that were killed by an undocumented person? And it's like, yeah, we can talk about that. Things can exist in tandem. Things can be dialectical.
Yeah, these issues are not exclusive to each other.
Yeah, but why don't we also talk about the millions, hundreds and thousands of Americans, if not millions, all around the world, but specifically in America, if we're talking about American citizens, that have been killed by the greed of the corporate billionaire class.
Absolutely. And are constantly killed, right? And how much the corporate billionaire class benefits off the backs of workers that are just cast aside, drained of resources and cast aside. I think, at least, maybe 10 years ago and a little prior, the fascist pieces were they would at least pretend to be a little shy about it.
Or silly, Sarah Palin.
Exactly, I made a mistake. Oh, you know what I mean?
I can see Russia from my window.
Exactly.
Sarah Palin, Google it.
Oh, why do you have to Google it? That's crazy. My mom and I talk about that line all the time. We still refer to it. But to come back, I just want to reiterate the point that Donald Trump's unapologetic nature of how he approaches his leadership, of how he approaches fascism, is what then emboldens folks that are like, oh, I'm shy with my fascism. I'm just being silly. He emboldens these folks to then also be loud about it and be proud. They are proud to be fascist, right?
I mean, we saw
They're
that in Cincinnati recently, right?
Yes.
Where there were, I think, a couple of Nazis literally holding swastikas that went and were saying it's their time or protesting. I don't know what they were protesting, Nazis.
What are you gonna protest?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But then the beautiful thing about that was the counter protesters, because it happened near a historically black area, and people showed up and were like, not here, and they burnt the swastika flags. And I think this really shows that we need to resist these tendencies, these very overt displays of fascism that we're seeing. And I think what Lubaba, you're saying about Trump being unapologetic, now he's surrounded himself with people like Stephen Miller, people like Pam Bondi, people like Pete Hegseth, people like Christine Noem, people like
Elon Musk,
Tulsi
Gabbard,
Kash Patel. These people do not care about you. If you think, listen, I understand there's a lot of people that say RFK Jr. has really good points about getting rid of additives and chemicals from our food. We agree with you. But he is not the only person to do that job when he's also actively responsible for the deaths, according to the governments where he visited, deaths of children in Samoa. We're quoting their health ministry that said that he was responsible for that because he went there, spread horrible bullshit about vaccines, which led to kids dying.
From preventable diseases.
Like measles, guys. From preventable diseases. And I think right now, in a time where we're seeing this seismic shift to the far right, unapologetically treating people who are not white, and not, heteronormative, as absolutely people that can be discarded, people that don't feel the same pain.
As subhuman, right?
As subhumans. We're seeing Guantanamo Bay, which if anybody doesn't know, Guantanamo Bay is actually part of Cuba, but America has colonized it. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I don't know.
So basically, Guantanamo Bay is an American prison outside of the American borders. Right? It's on Cuba. But America controls it. They have a whole military setup there. And Guantanamo Bay basically was where Muslims were taken, many of them innocent, as we were seeing now. I remember when I was a student in the US and I would bring up the horrible treatment of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, and people would say that I was a terrorist sympathizer, saying oh, these people are terrorists. We don't care if they don't blah, blah. And I was like, guys, but a lot of these people are being held there without any charges. And when you say the United States does not torture, you're basically torturing people outside of the U.S. And Guantanamo Bay, recently we saw many people were released after 20, 30 years. People that were captured when they were 25 or 30. Now they're being released when they're
in their old age. Sure.
And it's really sad, the trauma that they had suffered, the horrible health deficiencies that will have for the rest of their life.
The
isolation, the impact, everything that has, people are not able to grasp that back then, but now we're seeing that the Trump administration is sending undocumented migrants from the United States to Guantanamo Bay. The first flight landed there recently. This should be a cause of concern for everybody because the United States government has decided that it's going to take them a long... Because the estimates say that there's like around 11 to 12 million, if not more, undocumented migrants in America that add billions to the American economy, right? Yeah. Obviously, when it comes to deportations that Donald Trump promised and is now actively doing, you cannot deport 11 to 12 million people in 1 year. It takes a lot of time.
No, that's a lot of people also. Sometimes that's the size of some countries.
Yeah.
That's a third of Canada's population.
That's a third of Canada's population, yeah. And I think that what people forget is that when he's doing this, they're going to have to take these people they're arresting. Some they can deport right away. Others, they're going to have to put them in transitory areas, which are going to be either at the border by Mexico or now they're saying Guantanamo. Mm-hmm. Guys, that is what's called a concentration camp. And I know that there's people that are going to listen to that term and say, oh, you guys are being so hyperbolic.
Oh, come on. No, we're really not. You're literally recycling a prison, shipping some people out of it, being like, you know what? I think I've degraded your health enough to make you a non-issue for me. So I'm going to push you out and then put the issues back in here now. You're recycling torture.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that it's not just a prison. It's a prison that is widely documented by basically every credible human rights organization in the world to inflict horrible torture, both mental, physical, and sexual. And I think that sending undocumented people there whose only crime, if you want to call it, is to cross a border is absolutely beyond me. And I know that there's the Trump people and the Pierre Poilievre supporters in Canada that say...
If we got to you, I'm impressed with us.
Welcome, we're Rebel News. Just kidding, we're not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that, you know, the Pierre Poilievre fans, the Trump fans, their counter is, well, if you come into the country illegally, you broke a law. And what they forget is that, let's take America's example. We get it. That's a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. And I think everybody would really know and understand the differences between criminal and civil offenses if they're ever in trouble. Yeah. And I think these people have not committed a criminal offense. So for them to be treated like this, to be shipped off God knows where, to be held there, and now there's rumors, allegedly, that these undocumented migrants in these prison/concentration camps that they're going to send them for transitory periods are going to be used for free labor, so basically slave labor. Yeah. Should be really concerning, because if they did that to Muslims and you didn't speak, now they're doing it to undocumented migrants in America, and if you're not speaking, it can also happen to Americans. It can happen to you.
Yeah, prison labor is an industry that is essential to government resources, right? Like, you know, like there are prisoners that make uniforms for cents a day, pennies a day.
It's actually so troubling to hear that. Yeah. I did not know that was happening here. I know that in the U.S., definitely, I've heard of and seen evidence of prisoners who are majority black men and also Hispanic people that are being used as labor, basically free labor. You're getting a few cents to make actual products for corporations.
Yeah, over a few years you might make $13.
It's actually... I mean, it's so disgusting. We could do an entire episode on that.
Exactly.
And I think maybe
we probably will.
We definitely should, because I think that deserves its own space and time.
What you're saying about speaking up, this is happening to this group of people, this is happening to this group of people, and another group of people. How long is it going to be before it catches up to you? If you're untouched right now, how long will it be? You have to understand that that's temporary, right? It's like when I try to convince my capitalist friends that, you know, you think you benefit from capitalism and from the system, but you have to understand that that's temporary. It's not going to be the case forever. Your $35 an hour job is not going to save you from the wrath of billionaires, right? And so when it comes to resisting, I think it's important that we not panic and realize that that looks like things that are simpler than we often think that they are. Resisting is not just, getting into the streets and protesting or taking up arms, for example. Resisting is also using all the tools at your disposal, saying, I've acquired this much power and privilege, this is how I'm going to use my power and privilege. In the Western world, a lot of that looks like, and this is going to make some people cringe, but a lot of that looks like electoral politics and using different systems that are available to us, that we have been given the privilege of, having weight and having power to them. I think about the fact that, we might not always impact the results of elections, but the results of the elections will always impact us.
Absolutely.
As working class people, as everyday people, as people whose quality of life is being decided by our federal governments, by our provincial governments.
Absolutely.
And so that's the point of why I keep coming back to, I still have to participate in the electoral system. As much as I don't think it's going to save us, I think it's an important tool that it would be a shame to not use.
And I think, that's so valid. And a lot of people always say, like, oh, why does it matter? Whoever gets into power screws over the working class. And I say, okay, yes, but at the same time, it's easier to organize against the ruling class under some political administrations
with
versus
some allies, exactly.
Yeah, and we're seeing that with Donald Trump, right?
Exactly.
How they're going after unions now.
Yeah.
They're going after workers' rights.
Yeah.
And I think that can also be a whole other episode of what went on with the U.S. election and how Democrats are actually responsible for losing their own voters.
Yeah. But Ford is doing the same thing right now, right?
Yeah.
In the last 2 years, Doug Ford in Ontario, he has been trying to privatize our healthcare system for the last 2 years.
Education.
Yeah, exactly. But ever since he passed Bill 60, he's really been, speeding up the decline of our public healthcare system and trying to establish a two-tier healthcare system like the U.S. has. And right now, he's called a snap election in order to take advantage of the fact that he's already in power and that he can keep pushing these things. When I worked with the Ontario Health Coalition on their campaign a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and at this point, I guess, we worked with different parties at the provincial level in order to push our agenda.
The agenda that everybody should have healthcare.
Exactly. We were organizers on the ground that were talking to people, that were talking about the issues, that were collecting petition signatures, that were throwing a referendum, a people's referendum, if the government wouldn't call it. And we were able to protect certain parts of our public healthcare system. We were able to resist because of the allies that we had in Parliament, that were elected, that worked with us in order to take the work that we had done on the ground and say, how do we make it legislation? How do we make it a law for, our government system so that this is how we are governing the people on the ground?
Yeah, and I think great points, and I think a very easy way to know how, an easy way to get involved, if you have let's say an hour a week or 2 hours a week, you could, if you live in Ontario, let's talk about that, because Ontario election is on February 27th, this February, even though it was supposed to be in June of next year. You could basically Google what candidates are representing different political parties in your riding, and it's actually very easy to do online. You look that up, and then you find which candidate you're most likely to support. Go to their office. It's in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Ask them how you can support them.
Talk to them. Ask them who they are and what you need in order to trust them.
Are you able to canvass with them, yes or no? It's okay if you can't, if you have accessibility issues, whatever. Are you able to make some calls? There's a lot we need to be doing that's more than just Instagram stories.
Of course.
I know in the moment, we all do it.
Sure. It's important. We speak up. It's how we speak up.
But there also needs to be more things that we can do on the ground. And if you can really not do anything, but you do have money, please consider donating to organizations around you that you care about.
Yeah. A lot of times you get tax rebates also. That's why so many people donate to election candidates, because there are tax rebates set up to get your money to come back to you. So, for example, Doug Ford just sent out a $200 rebate right before this election, effectively to bribe people, to vote in this election. And a lot of people that don't need an extra $200 necessarily have been coming to the office that I work at right now and have been saying
the campaign office
that I work at right now, and have been saying, I'm here to donate my Doug bucks. And what is great about that is that, when someone's donating $200, the way our rebate system works, they still get $150 back when they do their taxes. And so in the end, you only end up spending $50. And so these are the ways that, accessing these tools and using these tools is more accessible for you in different ways. And so these are also things your candidate can tell you.
Yeah, so I would say Google it, go to the office, talk to them. And in addition to that, going back to Donald Trump and what we were discussing, so first of all, there's a constitutional crisis in America because of birthright citizenship that he's trying to get rid of, which is part of the Constitution. So how's that going to be handled? Next, he has decided on mass deportations that he promised, and we already discussed what's happening now with human rights in Guantanamo Bay. Another thing, among many other things that are alarming with these type of arbitrary deportations and arbitrary arrest of people. And also, we've discussed these enablers around him who are as irrational and unapologetically cruel as he is.
Yeah, and they are, who are like, you know, upholding this like oligarchy.
Absolutely. So now I think what we really need to address also is the way that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who knows who's the real president at this point, is basically eroding the American government and the state as it exists. And what I mean by that is American government's own departments. So now they're targeting the Department of Education. Allegedly, they actually want to dismantle it. Around 97% of U.S. aid, which is the American Foreign Aid Organization, which gives aid in terms of healthcare, revitalization of different projects all over the world, which is America's version of charm diplomacy to counter China's and Russia's rise, where China is helping build a lot of infrastructure in the world. China's new to that, but America has always been doing that through U.S. aid. Right now, 97% of U.S. aid employees have been told that they need to resign, or they will be fired, and they're being given exit packages. 97%. So
that's dismantling.
That's dismantling, right? And this is being done to many other American government departments. Like we always joke, like, haha, the fall of the U.S. empire. I think what people are not understanding is that there's real people on the other side. And the book that you shared with me, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation.
By Keeanga Yamuna Taylor.
Yeah, or it starts with like civil rights and before that and Jim Crow. And what incredible author that she is, what she talks about is that most of the government employees in the United States are mostly black.
Yes.
So this is actually an extremely horrific attack on black people's access to employment as well.
Yeah, the public service is so important for everyday working class people, right? Yeah. And so what do you attack first in order to like push a fascist agenda? Public services. And
I think people, like, there's valid criticisms of civil servants and the way that they act.
Okay, sure, you can say that about anything.
You are right. We can say that about anything, right? And I get people's concerns, because we don't want to dismiss people's concerns.
Yeah.
But, guys, if the civil servants wanted to make money, they wouldn't be civil servants.
No, it's true.
You do not make a lot of money in civil service.
No. You just get your needs met, that's it.
I know. Like, the finance bros of the world have very carefully and nicely distracted people to be like, this teacher or this civil servant makes $80,000 a year. And it's like, okay, you make $500,000 a year and you exploit your team and work.
Yeah.
And you think you deserve that. Whereas this civil servant is like actually trying to make sure we have a livable city. So if these people are doing this because they cared about their country, and now Trump administration is attacking them.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. Why all of this is important is because, and also I do want to mention that the American administration has now started attacking people of different gender identities.
Yeah.
And right now there are reports coming out of transgender Americans who are unable to access passports. And if they're unable to renew their passports, then you're effectively just like trapping them in your country. So you're seeing this attack happen against gender minorities, racialized folks, undocumented people, migrants in general. But it's been carefully crafted as like America First agenda. But what people forget is that when you don't speak up for one sort of horrific violence that is being done on people, it will come to you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? And what I want to kind of bring that all back to is what we were discussing earlier, is why what's happening down south in America, we say down south because we're in Canada for now.
Are we going to be the 51st state soon?
I don't know. But we'll talk about that. So what's happening is now that Donald Trump, the way that he's acting in America is actually affecting the way that many Canadians are seeing what me and many other people online like to call Timu Trump, which is Pierre Poilievre, right? And Pierre,
that's so funny.
Dude, come on, don't be offended, don't be a snowflake by me calling you a Timu Trump. It's okay. It's freedom of expression. So now we're seeing United States actually making another seismic shift in their alliances. Right. NATO's being threatened that you need to up your spending up to 5% of every NATO state. NATO is like a transatlantic military alliance. So America founded it, I think, and now they're just like, we need you to spend not just 2% of your GDP, but 5% on it. And just keep in mind that we're all over the Western world. We're living through an economically precarious time where people need economic support. Yeah. But Donald Trump is forcing governments to invest more on military, which will help weapons manufacturers. Exactly. And the ruling class.
Wow, the U.S. war machine is alive and chugging.
As always. It's on steroids now. And then the next seismic shift we're seeing is America isolating its allies like Canada and Mexico. Yeah. Because United States now, Donald Trump has threatened to annex Greenland, which is part of Denmark, a U.S. ally. They have threatened to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico in addition to other countries. Yeah. But specifically Canada and Mexico, they want to put 25% tariffs, which... he initially put, and then Mexico and Canada were like, no, we're going to tariff you back. Exactly. And then they stopped for 30 days. And Donald Trump was like, hold up, I didn't think that other people could do this too. So he paused the tariffs. Tariffs are basically a tax on the consumers, right? Yeah. If you're watching this in America and Canadian products coming into your country have a 25% tariff, you are paying 25% more for that. Do you think the CEO of the company you're buying it from is going to absorb that 25% cost? No.
What they're going to do instead is say, well, this is a working class person's issue. Pass it over to you and pit working class people against each other. Yeah. We talked about this actually on Friday, a few days ago, at the latest Spring Magazine meeting, where we were talking about how this trade war is simply a war to pit the working class against each other, and that nationalism and these ideologies are, again, being pushed onto us in order to divide us.
Absolutely, and I think, like, that's the thing. So now United States is isolating its allies, military allies, isolating its trade partners, and
ruining the geopolitical peace that could have existed in North America. Yes. Any semblance of geopolitical relationships.
Yeah. Because I know that people listening to us be like, well, look at, we understand, but we're talking about, like, the mirage or the facade of whatever existed.
Yeah. Free trade was basics.
Yeah. Allegedly, that's what capitalists always told us. And now here's the thing, right? United States has decided that they are willing to fudge over anybody that is not helping them. Yeah. I mean, the United States administration, I should say. And I think it's really concerning because now we're seeing people in Canada kind of looking at Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the federal Conservative Party that we have in Canada, and say, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the federal Conservative Party in Canada, is sounding a lot like Donald Trump. Maybe we don't want that. And we're seeing a shift towards other parties, in a small shift for now. I'm not saying Pierre Poilievre is going to lose. I do believe he's going to lose, but he might win. Right? But, like, obviously, we're not predicting that right now. What we're saying is that what's happening in the United States is affecting Canada. America sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Seriously. And now we're seeing that people are getting a little bit more engaged, like, wait, we need more worker protections. We need more investment into our industries. I think we are seeing a shift in Canada away from the far right policies of the Canadian Conservative Party, which never used to be that far right, but now are.
Because we've caught the cold of fascism.
Yeah, and I think considering what's happening in the United States, there's opportunists in Canadian politics like Doug Ford, who's the current premier of Ontario, the province we live in. And as Lababa said, he's called an election because even though the election was supposed to be next year, because he is really good, he's actually a good communicator. Believe it or not, he gets his message across. Even when he's charged with corruption, he's like, folks, I'm sorry. When was the last time you heard a politician apologize? So when people hear him apologize, they're like, he's a decent guy. So he's using this Trump attacks on Canadian trade as a way to galvanize people into an early election, because in Canada how elections work is you can call an early election if you're the party in power, and then if you win and you get a majority of the seats, you get another 4 or 5 years of power, right? So he's trying to do that. So we're really seeing how it's not that, everything that's happening in America is good for Canada because, like, we are getting more progressive. It's like, no, we're actually also seeing opportunities seize this. And we will be doing episodes on the Ontario election because it's on the 27th, so we'll be releasing them in the next few weeks. But also we're seeing a shift in like federal polling. We're seeing that ever since Trudeau resigned,
exactly.
Liberals are doing better in polls too.
Part of the reason why Doug Ford has also called this election early is because he thinks that Poilievre is going to win at the federal level. Typically what's happened as a trend in Canadian politics is that the party in power at the federal level loses at the provincial level. And so if Pierre Poilievre wins and the Conservatives form federal government, then it's more likely that Doug Ford will lose provincially and it'll be handed off to another party. In that case, it would likely be the NDP because they're the official opposition and have the most seats, and the Liberals are independents at the provincial level and don't have a caucus.
And that's the thing, right? Where now we're seeing, because Doug Ford doesn't want that, he doesn't want to wait until June 2026, so he's trying to do it now before Poilievre maybe wins. I think before we end today's episode, it would be remiss of us to not talk about Donald Trump's absolutely brutal and cruel suggestion of the United States annexing the Gaza Strip. Okay, so for anybody that doesn't know, Gaza Strip is part of Palestine. Most of the people living in the Gaza Strip that are Palestinians actually used to live right outside of the Gaza Strip, where they were kicked out from their homes when Israel colonized it, and they were all forced into the Gaza Strip and basically kept under an open-air prison. We've seen the genocide that has happened, and I think something that we really need to make it very clear to some Democrats that are still confused and some liberals that are still confused. Donald Trump stood there in the White House and said Gaza is unlivable, it's all rubble, it's been razed to the ground. Please remember the American president that actually helped the Israeli government raze Gaza to the ground, and it was Joseph Biden. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the vice president and Joe Biden as the president, the Biden-Harris administration gave a free hand to Israel to destroy Gaza so Donald Trump can come in and actually state a fact that Gaza has been decimated, but instead of actually providing a roadmap to peace, of saying reparations are in order, of how United States need to step in, because United States didn't just fund this genocide. United States is an active participant of an equal footing in this genocide.
Of course, absolutely.
And he had Netanyahu sitting next to him, Donald Trump, and Netanyahu's like giving this weird, evil smirk, smile, whatever his face does. And then you basically have all of the political parties in Israel right now, even the left-wing ones. I don't know if you saw it, they were all saying, yeah, we should consider this plan. And I was like, this is absolutely insane, because now ethnic cleansing now is like the official policy of the U.S. State Department of the United States government. And I think it is high time that we do need to reach out to our representatives in the governments all over the world, wherever you're watching us, and ask them to basically stand up against this American colonization and annexation of the Gaza Strip. Because the reason why it's important is because Gaza Strip has always been part of Palestine in every single peace plan. So when we talk about, or when people say two-state solution, why are you not speaking up? This is part of the two-state that you advocate for. When you talk about a one-state solution, why are you still not speaking up? Because this is really important for us, right?
And is that not the bare minimum that Palestinians deserve from us? You know?
And I think a lot has happened since we took a month break.
It's only been a month.
For like taking a month-long break.
It's only been a month.
A lot has happened.
So much has happened. January was the longest month ever. It felt like a year.
Too much to recap just in one episode. We tried our best. But we're going to come out with more episodes this season 2. And a lot of them, as Labab and I were discussing, are going to be focused on the Ontario election and then the Canadian federal election. Because when we talk about enacting change and talking about politics and what's happening, and the global south take, the global north take, and then our third take in the middle, we need to start local. And that's why we want to focus a lot on that in the coming episodes for this season 2. But we will do our best to also bring in international perspectives. Because we don't want to forget about what's happening in the world.
We're still a G7 country. We might constantly be bullied by the U.S. into doing whatever, but we are still a G7 country, and that does mean something when it comes to
We might be a G6 country soon if we become part of the United States, and then there's one less country. So, on that note, thank you so much for tuning in. You are listening to The Third Take with
Lubaba
and Taha.
And we are sorry.
We're sorry for the state of the world, even though we had no part in creating it.
Yes.
Take care, guys.